I know I always give spoiler warnings and tell you to go play the damn thing yourself first, but I really need to insist this time because milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk literally costs $1 and is only 20 minutes long. You don't even have to actually risk a dollar either since it's on Steam, so you can refund it afterwards if by any chance you feel you've been scammed. Also, and this is crucial, watching a playthrough doesn't count just because it's a visual novel, since doing so would take away from the experience and diminish a lot of the thoughts and feelings that this game aims to evoke in you. You'll soon find out why that is, whether you decide to play it or just raw dog the video now, but again, I really cannot emphasize enough how minuscule of a commitment this game needs. With all that being said, let's get into it. I was immediately not too thrilled upon seeing the very first thing that happens in Milk Inside a Bag of Milk. No, I'm not going to say the full name each time. What it did was ask for my name at the start. The only times I'd seen single player games do this in like the last 2 decades was to pull some meta-narrative shenanigans with it later on. Games like Undertale, DDLC and One Shot came to mind, all featuring characters who possess this knowledge of their own world's artificiality and your influence over it. It's not hard to understand why this storytelling technique is appealing to explore for so many people, and I can't even deny how much potential it has. But until this game, it had never really clicked much with me in anything where it's prominent. I'd always liked some of what these games did with their meta-narrative elements, it's just that my gripes had often unfortunately outweighed my enjoyment. The biggest reason behind that is how my immersion and investment in a story actually goes down rather than up whenever I'm actively reminded that it's artificial. I don't end up connecting with a character more when they spell out my Windows username or tell me about the files on my computer. They don't end up feeling more real than they otherwise would. They just end up reminding me that they're fake instead. I would care about them just like I do for any character or story, despite knowing that they're fictional in the back of my mind, if only they didn't constantly pull that to the front of my mind, if you know what I'm saying. Milk Inside a Bag of Milk commits this sin not only at minute 1 but at minute 2 as well. The game begins after I input my name, and one of the first things I read is the main character imagining herself as part of a video game, specifically one in which you can see her thoughts on the screen. At this point is when I start being pessimistic, guessing that it's not going to be an experience that will speak to me like it seemingly speaks to a lot of others, according to all the praise I had seen that had made me get the game in the first place. For those of you who disregarded my wishes at the beginning and kept watching this video without playing the game first, the plot is very simple. Essentially, you help this young girl buy milk from a store to the best of your abilities, and the reason she needs this much help in completing such a basic task is because she seems to be suffering from some kind of severe mental disorder. It's her thoughts and words we see on the screen while we play the role of a voice in her head. Of course, with the whole sinister atmosphere and those meta-narrative tropes I mentioned at the beginning, it's hard not to be suspicious of this story we're being told and wonder when this seemingly innocent girl will show her true colors as some self-aware entity that was manipulating you from the start or something like that. With this suspicion in the back of my mind, I kept playing along until we made it to the entrance of the store and met this weird alien-looking creature, after which the game abruptly crashed. I immediately guessed that this was intentional. I thought it was yet another cliche of the meta-narrative games making its appearance not even 5 minutes in, and I was already tired by this point. The interesting thing is that I later found out after finishing the game that it was not actually intentional and my game had in fact just crashed as any other game can. But those preconceptions of mine were so strong that it made me unfairly judge it in that moment for something it hadn't even actually put there itself. It just goes to show how easily you can develop strong prejudices for something based on just a few minor negative experiences you had before if you're not careful. But not knowing that yet, I was sick of playing along at this point and decided to experiment in my next attempt, abusing the girl whenever given the chance instead of helping. I thought I had no reason to feel bad doing this since I was now sure because of that game crashing bullshit that she was merely acting clueless. And sure enough, it took only 3 instances of me being an asshole for her to finally show her true colors. She looked at me directly through the screen in disappointment as the music got louder and more intense. The text on the screen got larger and slower than usual, spelling out these sentences. Looks like insert player name doesn't help me at all. I guess I'll try something else next time. You then lose and have to restart the game, but I was already satisfied with that. I had already figured out what this game was at record speed. It was no mind-blowing masterpiece, but just some basic as V is calling bullshit that just waited for you to fuck up so it could go, "Oh player, that was not very nice. It was very rude of you to say those things. Now, to punish you, I get spooky." Everyone else was probably just hyping it up because of its horror aesthetics and the fact that there was any kind of mental illness portrayal in it at all, even if it was just used for a stale bait and switch like this. I went back to playing along for my next attempt just to see the rest of the game. I was confident by now that it was not going to impress me with whatever it had left in store. I just hoped it had milk so I could be done quickly. Thankfully it didn't crash this time and I helped the girl get the milk by speaking to the weird aliens at the store. I gathered that this was how her mind perceived ordinary people while catching only the most emphasized keywords of their sentences, unless there was none, in which case it was basically like talking to a void. Horrifying. I'm not 100% on any of these interpretations here by the way, nor am I 100% on any of my other interpretations for the rest of the game, which I'll be discussing further in the video. I figured this was a good time for me to make that clear just in case. I'm not a mental health expert in any way. I'm not actually familiar with any symptoms or manifestations of mental illness as they're displayed in this game, nor have I ever experienced anything like them myself. However, despite all of that, these interactions in the store still did somewhat resonate with me. I'll come to why that is, but let's talk about the rest of the game first. There's this point after you leave the store and pass by a gas station where you can ask the girl if she's sure that this is all really happening. You can then insist that she's imagining all of this in her head and has to accept the truth. Now at this point I was still under the impression that I was supposed to somehow gain the upper hand on this manipulative entity posing as an innocent girl, and this choice seemed like a possible opportunity to do that. Unlike other points in the game where you could go against the girl's wishes, she doesn't just tell you that you're being rude once and move on to the next line of dialogue. Instead, you can insist on the same thing here over and over, and unlike the previous clashes, it's not a simple insult but a challenge to the girl's outlook. It's obviously a horribly insensitive and unhelpful one, since telling someone with mental illness that it's all in their head is like telling someone with tuberculosis that it's all in their lungs. But I was still looking for a way to get this true ending that I was sure existed, where I beat this sinister entity at their own game. And the other option basically felt like submitting to it, since it meant saying nothing and just passively letting the rest of the scene play out. So I kept insisting that the girl should accept the truth, believing that I was actually saying that to the entity, forcing it to accept that I was the one in control here. Alas, there was no path like I had expected. I didn't have the kind of agency I thought I had, and I got the same game over screen as before. Fine, I said. I'll keep playing along until the next opportunity then. I went back and said nothing this time, which led to me finally beginning to doubt myself as the girl opened up more about her past and actually acknowledged without any of my prompting that she was making all of this up in her head. She said that she knew she made me up and was really just talking to herself. These lines kind of slapped me in the face. I was expecting that someone or something in the game was going to directly acknowledge me at some point, like Monica or Flavi does. Like I said, I even thought that was what happened on the game over screen. But this was the opposite of that, and I don't remember ever seeing something like it before. There has been other games where you play as a character with a voice in their head that they talk to, like Deadly Premonition, and for me those always felt like the character was talking to the player too. But unlike in this game, there was never any reason for me to believe that it was actually literally the case. Here, even if the narrative had told me at the beginning that I was just an imaginary character in this girl's mind, the game's presentation and perspective, entering your name and being referred to by it at some point, and actually being able to choose dialogue options to talk to the girl all made me certain that it was only a matter of time until the narrative confirmed that she was in fact directly addressing me, the player, only to then flip that expectation on its head and tell me that there was no twist. I was in fact just an imaginary voice in this girl's head, and she was aware of it. The meta-narrative was built upon her awareness of the artificiality of the world she had created herself, rather than that of a world she was trapped in and I had power over. This was combined with a portrayal of mental illness that was empathetic and humanizing, yet still didn't pull its punches or avoid discussing any of the heavier stuff. And what resulted from this combination was something I had rarely seen. A game where the meta-narrative did actually better the experience, enhanced my immersion rather than breaking it, and made me care about the character as if she was real. I wanted her to know that I was there and not imaginary. I wanted her to know that someone was listening to her and trying his best to understand and help. But I was powerless, just like I so often am in real life. It reminded me of what I see as my real inadequacies whenever I try to help someone someone in perhaps not as severe of a situation, but a similar one nonetheless. All I can offer to be most of the time is an ear and a safe place where they can comfortably express themselves, and that's all I could offer to this girl as well. On the bright side, it at least seemed to be somewhat helpful to her. After she finished telling me about her trauma, it looked like she was genuinely relieved and even happy to be able to get all of that off her chest, even if it was just to a voice in her head. She thanked me and called this a special day, going on in excitement about how much more she wanted to tell me. I don't want to say that, but that's not me, is it? You can probably tell that by this point I had forfeited all of my initial suspicions about an upcoming meta-narrative twist or anything like that, and was fully invested in the story of this poor, traumatized girl in front of me. However, this line made me go back, not because I anticipated anything this time, but because I desperately wished for it. I wished that there was some hidden dialogue option or interaction here that would expose all of this as an act, or that I could avoid hurting this girl if I just waited on the screen for long enough and that single dialogue option disappeared by itself. But none of that happened. It was time for me to accept the truth. I had no control or agency over this world. I couldn't simply delete her mental illness or trauma by changing some files. I didn't have multiple paths to choose from that would result in different outcomes. It was plain and simple, just as I was told. I was made up in this girl's mind, and naturally, so were my lines. Which begs the question, why would she ever imagine me saying this? Even though, again, I'm no expert, my theory is that this was the response she was frequently met with whenever she tried to open up to anyone about her trauma. I think it's why she was so relieved earlier to be able to talk to me about it, because until then, she had always been told to keep her mouth shut so that she wouldn't make anyone around her uncomfortable. And this response had been so deeply rooted in her mind by now that she couldn't even imagine someone that wouldn't say that to her. Even from someone in a story she made up herself, she could expect no other response. How could she? She even called herself crazy, weird and delusional, all things she had most likely been called by others numerous times until she internalized them. She was so used to it by now that even after hearing it from her new supposed friend, she just said that she understood and even kept respectfully calling me dear reader. It's not like she had the power or the right to do anything else, and this was only emphasized further in the last scene of the game. Throughout our journey to the store, the girl had remarked on numerous occasions just how afraid she was of failing to get the milk and upsetting her mom, and I had assumed there were two simple sources of this stress: her mental disorder and the fact that she hadn't been outside for quite some time. But that all changed once we made it home and were greeted by the mom, or at least how she appeared to the girl. An eyeless, expressionless and uncanny face, speaking slowly and with no filler, leading straight into the question, did you bring milk? And if you could somehow still have any suspicions at all of the girl's nature at this point, her answer would surely make short work of it. A hesitant and timid "yes, mom," accompanied by the same expression that she made on the game over screen. That was the most devastating final blow to me. It's not like it hadn't already become clear by then, but this scene once again cemented for me in the most brutal way possible that there was never a single speck of malice in this girl's heart. Whenever you failed her, she was not looking at you in this way to stare at your soul through the screen or scare you into obedience. It was an expression of fear and disappointment. A fear of upsetting her mom and a disappointment in her coping mechanism failing and turning against her instead of helping. She was not going to make it at this rate. And if she couldn't, well, we don't know what happens, but I think this last scene implies plenty enough. Did you bring milk? Yes, mom. Did your new medicine help? Yes, mom. Go to bed. Yes, mom. It ends with a final stare from the mom that I'm guessing is to make sure that her command is obeyed. And that's the end of the game. How I walked away from this experience could not be any more different than how I stepped into it. This was supposed to be the simplest thing to just get out of my backlog, see that number of remaining games I have to play go down by one, and quickly move on to the next, which would be its sequel, Milk Outside a Bag of Milk Outside a Bag of Milk. I had never expected that it could drown me in so much thought and emotion conclusion after finishing that I'd have to take a break in order to digest and reflect on all of it. I had never thought that I would have so much to say about a game this short that I would turn it into its own video instead of a brief 2-minute section in the next backlog bonfire. I rewritten this script multiple times, even scrapped a whole earlier version of the video that I had spent weeks on because I was unsatisfied with it. At some point I burnt out and stopped working on it altogether. This was back in May. It's been months since and I'm back here again, still making another attempt because I can't let it go. I can't let it just be a brief summary among 30 other games. Not to downplay the value of any of those titles of course, but different games connect with different people differently at the end of the day. For me, it's not hard to understand anymore why this simple game garnered so much praise and was able to speak not just to me but to so many people who consumed it in some way, even though it may seem targeted for a much more specific audience at first glance. After all, this girl is going through a whole lot simultaneously. She literally only sees red, she obsesses and hyperfixates on the most mundane things like her footstep patterns to a degree that it locks her down, unable to move on until she fixes them. She suffers from delusions so strong that they put her life in danger. She is mentally and possibly also physically abused, and she has already gone through so many different types of medicine with none of them working so far that she has begun to see herself as a lost cause. I reckon that a lot of people who play this game might be neurodivergent in some way, but it seems unlikely for the majority of its fans to be living through exactly this or something very close. But it nevertheless speaks to all of us, probably even including those who are completely neurotypical, because most of us can relate to at least something in here to some degree, even if not completely. Maybe you don't suffer from any kind of mental illness, but you do have abusive parents. Maybe you don't experience any of what this game shows, but you do have a traumatic experience that still affected your life in a major way and it's hard to talk about it. Maybe you stress out and over prepare for even the simplest of tasks, or maybe you have a constant fear of being a burden or being judged, rejected or invalidated. For me, as I've said much earlier in the video, it was the interactions with the people at the store. I don't literally perceive anyone as a weird alien or completely fail to understand a single word that comes out of their mouth, but it does feel like I'm communicating with people who are from another world sometimes in my day-to-day life. Maybe I'm somewhere on the autism spectrum or have some other condition like that, I don't know. I've never been diagnosed and I'm not going to irresponsibly and falsely diagnose myself with anything purely based on what vibes I give myself and some hearsay. All I can say is that I frequently find myself struggling with social interactions, specifically at my workplace, because everyone just acts so irritatingly normal, you know? It's so difficult for me to take active part in these conversations sometimes, and the worst part is how naturally this all comes to each of them and how effortlessly they make it flow as much as needed. On top of that, I do often feel that if I ever tried to really be myself in these environments, I would still maybe not be judged openly, but I would definitely worry about being judged silently, like people going, wow, this guy cares about and spends time on such weird things. Why doesn't he spend all that on X and Y like us instead, like how regular adults do? I'm not a mind reader of course, and this could all just be me being overly cynical and lacking self-confidence. I admittedly only know everyone in my social life as much as they allow me to as well. Maybe some of them are more like me in their personal lives and can just wear their social masks more comfortable than I'm able to. Who knows? Regardless, what I'm getting at is that those interactions at the store did hit somewhat close to home for me, and that extra bit of relatability made me care for the girl even more than I already would seeing everything else in the game. And there's one final thing related to that I can't go without mentioning, which is the choice to keep the girl's diagnosis ambiguous. At some point she kindly asks that you don't question what she suffers from, which not only feels appropriate but also helps maintain that almost universal relatability of the game, I think. I can easily see myself making the same request if I were in a similar situation. I think it's kind of genius and heartfelt, just like everything else in this game. It really did shatter all of my expectations in merely 20 minutes and ended up being something that will stick with me for probably quite a while. I still don't know if I can do more for anyone in my life than what I've been able to so far, but it does feel as if this one small game provided me a better empathetic lens for mental illness than almost anything about it I've consumed before. And whether you have played it for yourself or only experienced it through this video, I hope you were able to get something worthwhile out of it too. With all that being said, as always, take care of yourselves and thank you for watching.